Rose here. For decades, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, we were taught something very specific about the 144,000. Not just that the number was literal, not just that it referred to a heavenly calling, but that the number was nearly complete, and that, practically speaking, the calling itself had already closed to most people. So here's the question this video examines. If the 144,000 was taught as a fixed number largely filled long ago, why are the numbers still increasing today? This isn't a video about questioning people's sincerity. It isn't about judging who partakes or why. It's about what we were taught to expect, what was stated with certainty, and what actually happened. Because for many of us, this wasn't a small detail. It shaped how we understood the governing body, truth, and our place in the organization. For much of the 20th century, the heavenly calling was treated as nearly complete. Beginning in 1935, most members were taught that they were not part of the 144,000. Decades of publications reinforced that only a few remained. And then in 2007, a Watchtower article stated that the Bible does not reveal exactly when that calling ends. Meanwhile, the number of partakers began rising again. So if you grew up hearing that only a few remained, what did you expect those numbers to do over time? As Jehovah's Witnesses, we were taught that the 144,000 was a literal number. They were the ones with the heavenly hope. Everyone else, the great crowd, had an earthly one. And that distinction was foundational. It wasn't optional, and it wasn't open-ended. So if the number was always described as literal and fixed, what would we naturally expect to happen once it was filled? Now, the number 144,000 has been presented as literal, but in the same chapter of Revelation, nearly everything else is understood symbolically. The tribes are symbolic. The description of the virgins is symbolic. Mount Zion is symbolic. The surrounding imagery is symbolic. Yet, the number itself is treated as exact and fixed, and that distinction isn't explained. It was simply presented as fact. So, if everything around that verse is symbolic, why was that particular number treated differently? See, before 1935, there wasn't a permanent distinction between two classes of believers. Early Bible students, predecessors to Jehovah's Witnesses, as well as all Jehovah's Witnesses up to 1935, were taught that all faithful Christians had a heavenly hope. There wasn't yet a defined, lasting, earthly class for all witnesses. Publications from the early decades consistently presented the expectation that faithful followers were part of the heavenly calling. So in practical terms, the assumption was simple. Faithful believers were expected to be among those going to heaven. This wasn't presented as a group already filled. It was understood as an ongoing calling. So if early believers expected a heavenly hope, when did that expectation change? A major turning point came in 1935. That's when the great crowd was identified as an earthly group rather than a heavenly one. And from that point forward, most members were taught to see themselves as part of the earthly hope, not the heavenly. So if most members after 1935 were not expected to be part of the 144,000, what did that imply about how many remained? In the years following 1935, the understanding presented was that the heavenly calling had largely been completed. Those joining after that point were generally not expected to be part of the 144,000. So, in practical terms, the calling was treated as essentially closed for most new members. And that expectation shaped how later generations understood their place, not as potential members of the heavenly class, but as part of the earthly hope. So if the calling was understood to be largely completed by 1935, what do you think we would expect the number of partakers to do over time. Now, alongside this framework was repeated language that the number was almost filled. We heard phrases like, very few remain. The number is nearly complete. This system will end before that generation passes. This language appeared repeatedly across decades. It formed a clear expectation. Then in 2007, a Watchtower article stated that the Bible does not reveal exactly when the calling ends. So the teaching moved from near certainty to uncertainty, without clearly revisiting the earlier expectations. So when we heard that only a few remained, what did we automatically assume would happen next? Now, when we look at the memorial partaker statistics, we don't see a steady decline. We see decline for a time, then leveling, then a sustained increase. Year after year, more people partook. Now, if a fixed number had already been largely filled decades ago, what would we expect to see today? And what do we actually see? This is where many of us first noticed something didn't fit, even if we couldn't explain it yet. Over the decades, the explanation surrounding the 144,000 has changed. Earlier teachings presented the number as nearly complete, and the heavenly calling is largely finished. More recent publications acknowledge uncertainty about when the calling ends. That represents a shift in how the teaching has been explained. The leadership today is from a later generation than those who originally formed these expectations. As those generations changed, the explanation of how the 144,000 is identified has also changed. Now, what's striking to me isn't just the increase. It's how the earlier understanding changed without a clear explanation. There was no announcement saying, we are changing the expectation about who may be anointed. Instead, the number 144,000 remained literal. The heavenly versus earthly distinction remained. But the earlier expectation that the number was nearly complete gradually faded. Earlier explanations suggested new partakers might replace unfaithful ones. Later, the explanation became more open-ended. Some might be called later, or the timing simply isn't known. So the earlier certainty didn't disappear all at once. It was gradually folded into newer explanations without clearly revisiting what had been taught before. When explanations change gradually over time, how do we recognize that something has changed? For many of us, this didn't come with clear explanations of the changes. We were taught to trust what we learned. So, when expectations no longer matched what we were seeing, it creates confusion. Not because people wanted to challenge anything, but because earlier teachings had formed very specific expectations. In some publications, explanations were also given for why additional people might partake. It was suggested that some who believed they were anointed might be mistaken or emotionally unwell. So when the number increased, the explanation often focused on individuals, not on whether earlier expectations had changed. For someone, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, this creates a difficult situation. If the numbers don't match what you were taught, you may assume you misunderstood, you're overthinking, or it's best not to dwell on it. If something doesn't quite make sense, where does that question usually go? The discomfort doesn't come from wanting to oppose anything. It comes from trying to make sense of two things that don't seem to match. Now, this video isn't really about one doctrine. It's about a pattern many of us experienced. We were given teachings with confidence and clarity. We formed expectations based on them. When later information didn't match those expectations, there wasn't a clear explanation of what had changed. So many people quietly tried to reconcile it on their own. Over time, the updated understanding is accepted, and the earlier expectation fades into the background. And the question people once had often remain unspoken, not because they don't exist, but because many don't feel there's a place to ask them openly. When expectations and outcomes don't match, how are we encouraged to make sense of that? If you have ever noticed this contradiction and you didn't have words for it, there wasn't anything wrong with you. Over the decades, the explanation surrounding the 144,000 has changed. Earlier teachings presented the number as nearly complete, and the heavenly calling as largely finished. More recent publications acknowledge uncertainty about when the calling ends. The leadership today, the governing body, is from a later generation than those who originally formed these original expectations. As those generations changed, the explanation of how the 144,000 is identified has also changed. When a teaching is presented with certainty for decades and then later explained differently, what do we call that? And how are members expected to make sense of it? This video isn't asking you to decide what to believe. It's simply asking you to stop and think about it. What were we taught to expect and what actually happened? And when those two don't match, is it reasonable to ask why? Sometimes the most important questions aren't the ones we're told not to ask. They're the ones we were taught not to notice. I hope this video resonated with you somehow or helped give you language for what you're feeling or what you felt. Please make sure to like algorithms and all. It helps this video go out to a larger audience. And if you really enjoyed it and would like to learn more about the history, changing teachings, as well as lived experiences, please make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons. And if you're able to, please share to help others understand the internal teachings and life impact as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. As always, take care of yourself and continue to search for truth beyond the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, which is now known as the Watchtower Organization. Remember, truth doesn't mind being questioned, but a lie can't handle it. Thank you very much for being here.